Yo, let's go, guys. Today we have a new little work for you. This is a totally different work from the others because in this story, we'll follow a protagonist who used to hunt vampires. And he hunted them to kill. But then there was that plot twist. He becomes one. That's too much of a spoiler, though. So, without further ado, let's get to the focus of our video. Some people prefer to live, but others prefer to hide inside coffins, and some among them also choose to enter urns. Here, we observe a group that was already dealing with these urns. He asks how many urns there were, and someone responds, 33. But for today, they should finish since you know the sun is already coming up. With that said, they grab the shovel and start putting some cement inside the coffins. Meanwhile, another person grabs their tobacco and throws it in another direction, but in a completely different place, we see someone wondering, what kind of life was I leading? But how did they end up in this place? For that, we need to go back in time. In the monitor, we observe her. She was as white as snow, but she was their target. In the background, someone raises their hand and asks, why her? To him, she wasn't just some ordinary woman, an ordinary Asian woman. She was also too weak to be his target. So he calls out to Kinue's leader, asking him not to judge her based on race or gender. She was a woman, but at that moment she was the most dangerous woman they had as a target, known as Anna. However, she had a code name known in the outer world as Snow White. That was a title given to her. She was also the leader of a Yakuza, but the reason she was more commonly known as Snow White was simple. She was the main supplier of, that stuff that drives you crazy. So, yeah, the stuff is pretty white, and it's a powder, right? That's how she ended up with the nickname Snow White. So this target thereafter is basically starting a wild party. A party that's all about the powder. So, to sum it up, all they had to do was go inside and, well, stop her party. Because if this party were to happen, we see that the world of miracle powders would basically explode globally. So they'll be using this moment to eliminate her, since they also discovered that firearms aren't really used against them, because firearms don't even cause injuries to these things. So yeah, this was the hardest mission they managed to find, but for that, they have the best agents at hand. So this mission was assigned to our leader, Suhyeok. His main objective is to go in there and also finish off those creatures. He agrees. Then the scene cuts to an elevator. We see 3 people talking, but at that moment they find our protagonist. They end up wondering what he was doing there since this wasn't a place where he should be entering. At this moment, he warns everyone that he just arrived at the place he requested to be. Meanwhile, those guys ask him to step back, but our hero ends up drawing his sword, and they notice this. At that moment, they start getting into combat positions, but they didn't stand a chance because Che easily defeated each of them. Every strike he made was enough to knock them all down. We also see that while he was fighting against the two, another one appears with a weapon in hand, trying to strike a blow at our hero, but Sher quickly notices his presence, and with just one blow, ends that guy's life too. Now that he's taken everyone out, he receives a new mission. Inside, there are basically 10 non-combatants that need to be eliminated, and it's estimated that there are 20 pretty powerful combatants inside. So he asks himself if it was necessary to send more people to finish off all those people, but he said no, 3 was enough, like 3 counting him only, but wasn't it too much for him to fight all that alone? Then he said there are 3 exits, and also no reason to send so many people since it was an elimination operation. But also, it doesn't matter how many accusations exist, and no one in this world here could be defeating his brothers. As he says this, we observe one of them finishing off the remaining survivors. At this moment, he calls someone and says that, well, it was too easy. They wonder what was happening. The mission was supposed to be difficult. But the leader, our hero, tells him to shut up and focus on the mission, since now they needed to approach their targets as quickly as possible. However, they should be careful since they were basically influenced by the white business there, and now they arrived at the door. They just had to enter. But before that, he asks to block all the exits, so we see that they were going to do that at the moment. Then he opens the door, but upon opening the door, he sees something strange happening. The people here were all, well, dead. They ask how this was possible, but ignoring all this, the leader, our hero, says he found his target. So he asks to close the doors, but at that moment, as he talks about it, the door locks. He wonders who was at the door to lock it, but the entrance and the door were also all locked, leaving him, our Suhyeok, totally surprised by what just happened. In front of us, we see that Snow White, who says that he was next. At this moment, we observe that she would soon be able to capture our MC since, well, those who were in there were all killed by her earlier. Our leader here, our hero, thought he was the strongest. But faced with this thing, he realizes he was nothing. What could he expect here? Maybe death. But at this moment, she is interrupted by one of our protagonist's brothers, saying she should stop. But she stops and then throws something at him. It was a person's head. But at this moment, she fires a shot that goes through both of them, and he too got caught in this game. Falling to the ground, we see that Jin ended up being eliminated. His companion, seeing the whole scene, quickly gets angry and starts running towards his target, but Suhyeok asks him to stop at once, so now she would be the next. Maybe with his power, he could already be finishing off her kind, but, well, that was also for nothing because, at that moment, he was taken down and defeated by a single bullet from that girl. Snow White said that no matter how many of these insects gather, they are still insects and weak. So she turns to our hero and asks him what he thought of all this. He didn't think much, but what he was doing with her now wasn't a good thing. Now he runs towards her. Running, he starts to think that he should think a little slower. This entity was taking advantage of his capacity, but still, he couldn't. So, well, now he couldn't go back, only that she grabs a bullet in her hand and, with just a flick, shoots it towards Suhyeok Hill. But he sees the bullet approaching and manages to dodge it quickly. She is surprised to see that Suhyeok wasn't an ordinary person. Maybe he was different from the others. So she grabs some teeth and throws them at Kenru, but Kenru dodges all those things that were thrown at him. As soon as he dodged all that, he goes towards her with a jump. We observe him approaching her with a gun in hand, and he tells that thing to die. But on the contrary, our Snow White grabs our hero by the head and then pushes him back. He received a small push that was thrown a little far. Falling to the ground, he tried to understand what was happening. This thing had a strange power. But then we observed that Snow White jumping on top. But if the jump she made was only to do something, this thing was to land on our hero's leg. After receiving this small damage to his leg, screams in pain while kept screaming, we observe the face of this crazy here Snow White liked our protagonist, but what Suhyeok did made her a little more than unusual with Suhyeok. She wanted to do something more than send him to F for now. So she approaches our hero. As soon as she approaches, asks him to entertain her, a little more fun. All this he went through was fun. He asks her not to joke with his face. Since this scene here shows that it wasn't fun to take people's lives for her, maybe it's fun, but at this moment, Quenru will show her what true fun is. With his mouth open, he approaches her neck. And here we observe him taking a bite out of her. But he quickly pulls back, tearing a piece of her. At that moment, he picks up a shard of something from the ground. And with that hand, he ends up stabbing it into her. After seeing that, even as she was falling, Snow White was finally defeated. Now that he defeated this Snow White, he faints from so much happiness, knowing he could return home happy. Here, he also managed to avenge his companions and, in the end, survived. But he was the only one who survived. He apologizes for his companions who fell on the ground. We see that the girl hasn't died yet. No. She then gets up and says that what he did was unforeseen and such, right? Unexpected things make her totally leave this too, right? Biting her neck was also more than unexpected. It also left her impressed. Her neck was healing while he, with a perplexed look, wondered what the hell this thing was in front of him. But he doesn't have much time to think, because here we observe that something started happening to him. But Snow White just asks him not to try to understand the meaning, since you are the first one to know that it is also this way here. While he was writhing in pain, we observe her asking him to hold on, because if he could hold on, things would change. At that moment, jumping in, pain, we observe him falling unconscious. She finds him pathetic now that he's dead. We can see someone in the background entering. they were people calling for their boss. But she, observing that more people appeared to disrupt her plans, she grabs some teeth and throws them in their direction, taking down one of the guys first. After that, she said that the next one should come in, because now she would be finishing off each one of them. But since her fun ended at this moment, she is no longer interested in playing with anything or anyone else. At this moment, she needs to return to Japan. Those who were there just agree with her, so they leave, leaving our hero totally there in the V. Meanwhile, we observe in another place him waking up. At this moment, he understands that maybe death was something that would calm his soul, but that wasn't real. We then observe two thugs there talking about what was happening. He then turns towards our hero and wonders if he is alive by any chance. But the other said it was impossible because he ended up going there in the fight against some totally unknown creatures. But now here he wonders what kind of regiment would lead a person to reach this point. So, right? If by any chance here he refused to die, right? Then those guys take their cigarette and put it out on our hero's neck and then say they should bury the beast soon to let it rest in peace. But he said no. He wouldn't basically be buried. Maybe this is then his evaluation of his death. Those two there wonder if he survived all this. He just needed to stay alive and would also manage in the end to take revenge on that woman there, Snow White, who did all this to him. But at this moment, he receives the mission from Alpha, the mission to eliminate our Snow White. Given the mission, he arrived at the door at the moment. Then he said to be careful because upon entering they would be facing that whole repeated thing from before. But now it was different. Someone from behind appears and puts a hand on his mouth. And that was our Snow White, who says that you also made it. You made it? I have no idea what it is. Because she just says he will be more than welcome. Then, at this moment, he wakes up all startled. He looks at the sun there at noon. But he wonders why he was in this situation. And also why his head hurt. But now he wonders what was happening, or why this thing here happened. And well, right? Why was everyone lying on the ground defeated while he was left without understanding anything that was happening? Someone calls for Shin-Hoo and comments that he was from the main headquarters there. He says that our Shin-Hoo needed to follow him to a headquarters soon then. Since this scene here shows that then, inside a limousine, in a car speeding at 1,000, we see Suhyeok asking him what happened or why everyone earlier was lying on the ground in that state. He only says that he was investigating that too, and that he only heard that he managed to complete the mission, but he also wonders if he wasn't tired. But he said he was fine, all calm. But you know, the trip to the headquarters was very long, so he asks him to sleep a little and rest since the trip would take a long time. He puts on the mask and turns to him at that moment, covering his throat. He asks what kind of person these were, but at that moment, he didn't have much time to resist or do anything since he fainted. That guy calls someone and tells the boss here that he managed to protect the main sample. The boss from another place on the line said they did a good job and just needed to transport him with all care since he needed to be delivered to a laboratory to do some research. Now that he hung up, we see him there on the table laughing with a totally weird face. He said he finally got that thing. Now it will be his. At that moment, he arrives at the car and says he had arrived. The boss runs out like a little child looking for candy, saying he needed to see personally the thing he most desired in the world, since now having that, he can proceed with his experiments. But at that moment, when this scientist opens the hood from behind, he is surprised and has a totally shocked face. He sees both of them totally knocked out inside the trunk. Now that he was knocked out, he turns towards the trunk and wonders who did this. But someone opens the door and bang, shoots him, hitting him squarely, making him fall back. The others there try to do something but can't even manage because the guy who was shooting was quite skilled, defeating them all. We see the boss there totally shocked by what just happened. Everyone here was killed in the blink of an eye. What happened? Someone then gets out of the car, and he, totally in shock, widens his eyes, but at that moment he understands the whole situation, and he can't stay here even for a bit. He runs in another direction, calling for his guards to eliminate this single man. At that moment, we see several guards appearing in the background, running towards our protagonist, but he didn't even have much difficulty dealing with these guys who just appeared because with small shots and small movements, he managed to destroy each one of them. But even destroying these, more kept appearing as if they were infinite people. But even so, he quickly dealt with each one of them. With just one punch, he would knock one out. With just one movement, he would finish them off. But after finishing them off, we see someone delivering a full blow to Suhyeok, making him completely fall to the ground. Now that he fell, he could already be taking this thing here to the laboratory, but not so soon because that thing there that they were going to take to the laboratory wakes up. Holding his hand, he knocks down one of those officers. However, realizing that he still hadn't died, he grabs his weapon again. But the officer there wondered why he didn't die. He was shot in the head. So at that moment, we see that he didn't have time to think about what he was going to do because our protagonist grabbed him, and here he knocked this guy out. At this moment, he thinks about what was happening. He and his team protected the country where he found a not-so-good message saying that sacrifices were necessary. Well, sacrifices for him to achieve some of his accomplishments. This was enough to make him even more determined. What an irritated then-now running for him turns around. The leader there observes there then, the last of his henchmen being defeated by our hero, our hero, after that, says that he now is the next one being eliminated. Moreover, this was something where he should basically keep in his mind this thing was to be abandoned once, not twice or even 3 times that he was killed. But he doesn't know what's really happening with his body. But what is certain is that he was an information agent, which means he needs to find his ALF search for information, then eliminate while he was approaching that leader. He asks Esho to stay calm, because now he will be explaining everything to him, what happened. So, then he asks him to forget everything that happened back there, because if he forgot, he would be giving him a pretty high promotion, but Suhyeok wasn't in the mood for conversation. So with that, he asks that thing to shut up and answer his questions. He wonders what kind of question he would have to answer. So then again, he makes some excuses that there was basically a misunderstanding in the story, but our protagonist has no time for conversation with him. He then does the same thing as before after that. He asks him to keep answering his questions, but even if he dies, he will come back to life there. He noticed with his wounds that happened just now, were completely healed now. So then, this was the same thing that some of the subordinates of that Snow White had there. She managed with that power to reach the top, being the strongest in Japan. So as a result of that, they sent our protagonist to seek the technology similar to hers. Since having that technology, they could be studying that too. And with that studied, they could be using the same technology to their advantage. And so then they started sending several people, but several people unfortunately died, just like several people. He was also sent reliable people, but in the end, he was the only one who achieved what he so desired. But everything changes too when she entered Korea, which means that she brought the technology along from now on. They could be using that technology to their advantage, because also with that technology, you no longer need to worry about injuries. So then, Hishiru worked hard. So now he doesn't need to worry about anything else. He's a hero. But then again, he lashes another thing at him. He screams in pain and wonders, why did he do that? So then now he talks about hero only. He doesn't know about his life. Besides, how dare he use him as a guinea pig? But now he has one more reason to keep him alive, since he wants to know more about that thing there that turned them into this monster here. But also he has the reason to also not keep this thing alive. He sent his companions to all die, but if he had done something earlier, he would have saved his companions. But he comments that those idiots who accuse him are just also combat people. Also, he said before that he couldn't be stopped, and that was his job. They basically died because they were doing their mission, or mission they wanted. But then he continues to babble on saying nonsense. But at that moment, their Shiru lashes a kick at his mouth that makes him almost fall to the ground. But since this lazy leader here liked to send everyone to limbo, basically, he will do what he did to them. Basically, he pulls out a sword, and with that, he was going to do damage to this creature here below quickly. He asks him to stop already with what he was going to do. But he doesn't stop only that. Here at this moment, the sword wanted to hit him, ends up being deflected. That which appeared asks him to drop the weapon and surrender the guy. Lying on the ground, asks him to run quickly to help him, so an entire group of guards appears, and he realizes that this was dangerous. so he needed to find shelter as quickly as possible. He runs, but that armed fight shoots in his direction. At this moment, he is hit full on after receiving this bunch of stuff in the face. He falls hard on the ground after he falls hard on the ground. We observe that former arrogant leader there saying that he was just a loser who got some random power, now he should be tied up. And in the end, deliver all the blood for him, then he asks to keep shooting, because if he happens to get up, it was to take him down. Even if he was a more powerful KOA, he would be nothing here, not here. So, he asks to continue. But someone in the background ends up calling for him. He quickly turns around and sees a mysterious shadow. That shadow was of a person. That mysterious girl just says that down there was a certain Suhyeok. He doesn't understand. She then repeats that this guy he just took down was a certain Suhyeok. But he didn't want to have time to stop and think. He asks to finish off that one over there. But what he thought would become almost impossible, because that unknown girl quickly jumps from the roof. Those guards don't understand what was happening. She jumps from such a height and still survives. But at this moment, a few quarters happen and little flies up. That girl passes between the guards and quickly manages to take down each one of them. But the guards suddenly start retaliating, shooting at her. But she also manages to dodge all the bullets with her sword in hand. With the sword in hand and closer than ever to those guards, she advances. But as she advances, she cuts each one of them. However, while finishing off those, there was a totally hidden sniper aiming at her. He then, after aiming, ends up shooting. And here we see the bullet in slow motion almost hitting her. But she quickly looks towards the bullet with her red eyes. With those red eyes, she can dodge the bullet, or better yet, cut that thing in half. She didn't just block the bullets, but also cut them. What kind of monster was this person here? But the guards didn't have much time for life to keep observing her there. Not because she quickly passes through them, cutting each one of them. After destroying all the guards, now it's the leader's turn. The leader was on his knees while seeing that unknown girl approaching, but he only has time to say that she was a monster. A monster should be destroyed, but he didn't have time to think about that either. No, because we observed that she cuts off half of his head. After doing that, she approaches Shano and wonders if he was really that guy, since our Snow White was asking for him to go towards her, because she asked him to show up there, because it would basically be more than unexpected. He, on the ground hearing all this, quickly turns to her with gritted teeth. There he tells her to go to that place, but correction, she says to bring him alive, or basically dead, or in pieces there to her. The important thing is just to bring him, realizing that if he stays still, he's going to get slapped in the face. He ends up pulling out his small machete. With that weapon in hand, he manages to defend himself from her sword, but then she makes another contact attack. While attacking, we observe that she finds our protagonist very unpredictable, but here he sees that he lost a lot of blood, was very weak. But even though he continues, he will only be following the same idea. Fighting, and in the end, right, not achieving anything. But if he, by chance, didn't continue, maybe there wouldn't be a story to tell. But at this moment, she says that here was the end. We observe that she got what she wanted. She waited for Suhyeok, but our protagonist, with an expressionless face, quickly grabs her hand. Now that he grabbed her, he said he managed it. He grabbed her, and then after grabbing, we observed that it wasn't just her who managed to make the attack. Suhyeok also managed to do that. He makes a cut, but she also makes a cut. However, the stronger cut is the one that wins. Our protagonist just falls to the ground while remembering that Snow White. But this time, for sure, he cut off her head. So now he won. Now he could be resting since he was very tired. But she says that, right? She asks him to relax and stay quiet. We then observe that she got up, leaving our protagonist in shock. Now that she got up, she understands why Snow White wanted our hero so much by her side. However, our hero realizes that his body was immobile. He couldn't move his body, but well, right, he did well. But now he could rest, because now the next time he wakes up, it will be in front of our Snow White. She cut off his movements. Now they should return. She took her sword, and guess what? Suhyeok still wasn't unconscious. Here, our protagonist got up. She was surprised to see that he She still had the courage to stand up, but it was already too late. She grabs her sword, which was our MC's. The blow that was going to hit her ends up being cut at that moment. Then we observe that now it was late. Now she could already be proceeding with her plans, not so soon. But then we observe that he lands a punch on her chin, almost knocking her down. However, part of her mask ends up breaking. At this moment, we observe that Suhyeok didn't stay quiet with just one attack because he prepares to attack her with a new one. But now he attacks with the arm that was cut off. At that moment, she is surprised to see that he regenerated too quickly. However, we discover that his regeneration wasn't ordinary. His regeneration was very fast. Then we observe that he not only regenerated quickly, but was also intelligent. He ends up biting her hand. She saw that this wasn't good. To get him away from her, she makes several cuts, but it doesn't help. Her cuts don't even work. We observe that Suhyeok manages to do something to her, but if she lets him continue doing that, she will lose everything. Damn, if she stayed here, she would lose everything, so she cuts her arm off, leaving Suhyeok behind with what was left. But now, stopping, she saw that what was in front of her wasn't something ordinary. So she wonders what kind of thing that was. It roared like a bison or something like that. However, the moment that thing was about to do something, we observed some shots approaching it. She saw this, and then used her sword to defend herself. But at that moment, we observed that one of the shots ended up hitting her. Then we observed that some people appeared. These are some people known as people from the churches, but also who are people that hunt vampires. So, right, she ended up encountering two halos now here, with the objective of purifying the souls of these two mere humans who were hunted here. Now she will wreak havoc on these two. She saw that those bastards would do what they promised. But that woman asks to shoot in their direction. So they point and prepare, and they shoot. The two are hit. They fall to their knees and don't understand how this is possible. Then, after destroying their legs, she asks to stop and asks to use that. Then he pulls out a kind of sniper, but a differentiated one. Now that he used that, the tips stick to our protagonist. Then, a shock goes towards Shinryo. At this moment, we observe that the shock wasn't small, but rather quite high. That girl just observes and saw that the sun's rays were already very high, and it wasn't good to stay here. The sun was so strong that it made her skin melt. So now approaching, she wonders if it was hot. But she asks them to relax because the fire from another place she's going to is certainly much hotter than here. But she asks, rest not to be so happy, not like that, because she was a mere human too. She also asks her not to be so dismissive. So this vampire attacks him, but at this moment, we observe that this woman wasn't just any woman. No, with just one blow, she destroys her hand. So, right, she asks her to relax because she didn't need to worry, as her friend would soon be going to the same place where she would be going. But at this moment, they turn in the direction where they see that our Suhyeok wasn't basically down yet. They wonder what happened because our Suhyeok was still standing. Even more, she was surprised to see that after receiving several damages, he was still standing. But she wonders why he isn't affected by the sun. The girl who was there simply doesn't understand what's happening, but this was her chance to run. She runs while leaving the two behind. Another one asks to follow her. Even though she runs, she manages to catch up with her, but she stops because she hears a scream. We observe that one of her henchmen was having trouble dealing with Shin. We observe that a blow was going to hit him, and it would be ugly if it did. So for that, we observe that the girl crosses a sword through our protagonist, cutting off his arm and asking him to retreat. But Suhyeok then looks in her direction. The girl said that this guy was different, more dangerous. We then observe that she should finish him off as quickly as possible with the blow she cuts with our protagonist, but she looks closer and sees that it didn't cut, because he used his arm to defend himself, but the arm that was cut before regenerates in the blink of an eye. Then he uses his other arm to counterattack. This arm almost hits her face, but she quickly dodges. So she thanks the gods for giving her this opportunity, and she also thanks for seeing that she hasn't finished off this guy before. She can play a little too. So she uses a power. That power goes all to her fist. With that power, she punches our hero. That punch was enough to throw our Xenu a little away, but also a guy like this was destined to always stand out. So she wonders how a guy like this was hiding for so long, but in the shadow, we observe that Zyron hasn't been erased yet. No, he used his companions to basically replenish himself because she sees that Suhyeok was drinking the blood of that guy there that the vampire from before cut him. But after drinking that blood, the beast became much more powerful. He even starts growling now, realizing that he has become much, much stronger. She should already be finishing him off here as quickly as possible. Now she will be using the divine sword. This sword is something that cuts anything. So as soon as she used that sword, she calls that thing so that it would come at her, because now she wanted to see the maximum potential of that. But its potential would not be highlighted here now because our hero ends up falling from exhaustion in the end. The girl who was going to use her greatest power here ends up being surprised, pretty happy, right? To see that our protagonist fell there, but still she didn't understand what happened. Then we just observed that someone was calling for him. Someone was calling for Suhyeok right here. He recognizes this voice. This voice was from the commander. Well, the commander was wondering if Shiju was awake or conscious, but the girl said yes, he was conscious. Now here, waking up, he wonders what happened. What he simply sees happening is that he was tied up with some rather strong chains. Chained, we observe that girl approaching us, the kin. Then she basically spent some time considering his condition. Now she decided that she will be killing him. The vampire at this moment stops and starts widening his eyes. He doesn't understand. Vampire? He was not a vampire at all. After this woman said he was the vampire, he asks this woman to look closer. Vampire? He would never be something depressive like that. He also doesn't like blood. Well, she will have to prove that to Suhyeok. Approaching, she grabs his face, then she bites her finger, and blood comes out of it and falls directly onto our protagonist. The first acts of denial come there saying that he wasn't, but then he says that he likes blood. His veins start bulging out at this moment. He tried to control himself, but now he saw that possibly this blood here was attracting him. Now that she showed the blood, she asks there to our hero if he now believes. Fallen, we see him trying to understand what happened for him to end up in a situation like this. So I don't believe it, but it seems to be, was to leave, to be discovering this in a next part. But all ready for us to have that our next part here in our channel.